Well, here I am in Quincy Square. They put up all the barrels to do construction here, and they got to show that the place has been occupied. It hasn't been, but you know, it's my hometown. They're ripping me off. This is the way it goes. I'm going to do this in English because I had some requests to do it in English. It'll be translated. Behind me is the Granite Bank. Let me stop right here and turn the camera. Quincy Square. It's the place where I spent time as a kid. I grew up about a quarter mile from here, about half a kilometer. This is the Granite Bank that we're looking at, now Bank America. It was built right before the Great Depression. The president of the bank, his name was Theophilus King, as in Theophilus King. And his ghost still haunts the lobby. I think I've seen him a couple of times. I'll show you the sign at the entrance. We'll go over there in a few minutes. Next to that, you can see the head injury community services thing. That's kind of appropriate for this place. It is brain dead. Behind that is an office building that used to be Stop and Shop's world headquarters until they couldn't put anybody inside it at all above the first floor. While they had their supermarkets fully stocked and everything dated and stuff. We did a lot of study of that. My credit card worked fine, and here we have Old City Hall. I'm still standing in the same spot. There's Old City Hall, and behind it is New City Hall. New City Hall has one of those large granite marbles in front of it. They have a bunch of guys working on that just to prove that the world functions, and they filled up the air with garlic stink to iconically prove that this place actually is occupied when it isn't. And there's the old cemetery. We'll be going into that momentarily. That'll be in the next minute. This is the sign at the gate to the Hancock Cemetery. We'll go inside. You see some obelisks, some urns, and then some old tombstones. Also, you'll see some little bunkers carved out in the hills. Some of those are tombs, and some of those are. I'll explain that. Here's the first marker right inside the door. You look over here, see Old City Hall in the back there, some old tombstones. I'm not going to take a look at all of them, I'm just going to pick one that I find of interest. But that's the cemetery. You can see that there are a number of crypts that are built into these little artificial hills with grass on top of them. Most of them have names on them, some don't. There's one here, for example, says 1854. That does not have a name on it because what that's used for is, in the wintertime, the ground used to freeze pretty deep around here. And they used to have to leave the bodies out in the cold, so they just stick them in those places until the spring came and they could dig the holes. Quincy's the city of presidents. Here's the tomb of John Quincy Adams, and some of you might be curious because if you look at the tour guides, you'll notice that John Quincy Adams is buried inside that church. That's a Unitarian church. And so it's right across. There was a street there. It's now a pedestrian walkway. I went into the new cemetery and I asked the grave digger, you got John Quincy Adams buried in two places. What, do you got a tunnel? And he said to me, no, let me tell you a story. Evidently, John Quincy was buried in here. And then one night, the whole tomb caved in. It was about midnight. And the cops couldn't handle going inside the tomb to fish out the casket or whatever was in there. So the gravedigger I talked to at the other cemetery said he had to be called in the middle of the night, and he came in, and then they moved the corpse across the street and I guess buried him next to John Adams. I actually never went in that to take a look at it. We're going to go over to the mansion later, but first I want to show you the inscription outside of the Granite Bank. Here's a picture of the other side of Hancock Street. You can see the pedestrian walkway. This was a street a couple years ago. It isn't anymore. Let me show you this inscription. It says, an old city with a young spirit. It probably means that the place isn't haunted anymore. It used to say an old bank with a young spirit. The bank was built in 1929. It was the first skyscraper in town. It was 10 stories tall. And my partner lived in the top 2 floors for a while. And they put a restaurant across the way to cross them out right after he moved in. Let me show you that. So as you can see, there's the Granite Bank. And my former partner, my NSA partner, he lived on the top 2 floors. I lived out on the beach. I'll show you that later. And this is Chestnut Street. They put a restaurant there in the first building called the Fat Cat. Let me just show it to you. I'm on my way to the library. So when the Fat Cat moved across the street up to the top 2 floors, they put in the Fat Cat restaurant to cross him out. So I didn't know he was in town. That's how they think, as opposed to proving he's in town. It's just their system. 2 ships passing in the night. I got stories about Sully's. I got stories about that place down the corner, but I'm going to skip that part of the narrative. All kinds of stuff one can talk about. One's home neighborhood, really. I'll show you that later. Our next stop's the library, then we're going to take a look at City Hall, and then the Adams Mansion. Here we are at the square. This is the Thomas Crane Public Library. There are, I think, 7 buildings built like this in a similar style throughout the state. One's in Wellesley, that's Town Hall in Wellesley. Another one's at Lars Anderson Park, that's a different story. And another one is in Northampton, the Forbes Library. I forget what the other ones are. That's the high school down there. And this is the old Quincy College building, just a junior college. I grew up a quarter mile that way. I'll show you that in a bit. This is the empty Intercontinental building. Oh, they turned on a light up there in the second from the top floor finally. Matches the 2 on the other side. Proves that Intercontinental's out of business. And there's the back of the Unitarian Church. And you're looking up at City Hall. We're going to go up to City Hall and take a look at the granite marble. Here you see new City Hall. It's right next to old City Hall. And if you look close, around all the confusion that was just summoned, they had to put all these people, I guess, in my picture, at a technical glitch. But you'll see the granite marble, which is a Masonic symbol. It's an oxymoron, actually. What kind of marble is a stone? It's made out of granite. I think it's 6 feet in diameter. We'll go up to the cemetery. It's a matching one that came from Theophilus King's tomb. It was a mystery to me when I was a kid. We'll take a look at that in a few minutes. We've changed locations. I'm now over on Adams Street, across from the Adams Mansion. You can see up the street, there's some nice buildings around here. There's an empty alleged veterans place here that I can't live in because I don't have my veterans ID card. It sits in Mike's drawer somewhere. And that's the Adams Mansion. 2 presidents came from there. One was John Adams, the other was his son, John Quincy Adams. It's a long history. It's online. You can find it. There's some grounds back there, a few acres. And then there's this big stable house. I've been inside. It's actually kind of nice. In the springtime, you'll see some wisteria over there to the left. Kind of like what's on where they had the Easter egg hunt. You could have seen with the interview with Ainsley Earhart and Donald Trump. It was in front of the wisteria. That's what it looks like. They have it here too. The place I live is still a quarter mile away. It's like we just walked along the line, about a half a mile. I'm going to walk over there now. I'll show you the place after we go to the Dorothy Quincy House. Take a look at Butler Pond, and then we'll take a look down the street I grew up on. Now we're back to Hancock Street, and that's looking toward the square. See that empty apartment building there? There's a cop kind of standing in front of it, but just out of the way, so I couldn't ask him about the lights being off. But he did pull his nose. I asked him about that. He said he didn't mean anything by it. I believed him because I'm not smart. That's the Dorothy Quincy House. We're going there in a minute. And that's the Quincy Armory. It was a pretty active place when I was a kid back in the 60s because the Vietnam War was going on, and There was a big reserve unit there. They were getting people ready to go to Vietnam. And that looks down toward Wollaston. That's Hancock Street too. This is the Dorothy Quincy House. She was John Hancock's girlfriend back in the late 1700s. It's a famous house. Ended up somehow in the Adams family. I think my great-grandfather, it was Henry Brooks Adams, and I think he lived in it for a while. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. lived in it for a while. I don't know if Junior was there or not. And also a guy named Peter Butler, which you'll see. This is looking down the street. This Butler Pond, which was named after him. This was all farmland back in 150 years ago. Looking at the Dorothy Quincy House from the pond, and I just wanted to say, when you sit in the dining room of that place, you can imagine what it was like to have breakfast or have dinner there. I often imagine Peter Butler sitting at the table, pounding his fist, going, "Oh man, another day here. I'd rather be a leprechaun in Ireland." Here's Butler Pond. I played around it when I was a kid. The lady in the greenhouse over there, must have been about 1967 or so, jumped into the frozen pond in January once and fished my dog out. My dog was a German Shepherd named King. A nice dog. This is the city of presidents, by the way. No kings and no emperors in the land of the free. We're about to head to the street that I grew up on, which is right over the hill at the back of that house. And I'm going to point down the street. I'll take a picture of the building I grew up in, but I'm not going to walk past it because the morons around here want to pretend I don't own it. My partner, my NSA partner, bought the place for me, put it in my account a long time ago. I own a lot of property around here. You'd never know it. Not the way they treat me. It's pretty disgusting. This is Putnam Street, looking at it from Marymount. You see the intersection there. Look down Marymount. Most of these houses were built 1910, 1920, about that time. It's a nice residential area. We're going to head up the hill and I'll show you the neighborhood I grew up in. Okay, we're looking back on Putnam Street from Greenleaf. You see that's all residential back there. There's some apartment buildings down here. Some of them have been around since I was a kid. It's a prep school down the corner there and a Christian Science church. We're looking at Putnam Street. It continues. My family lived in the first house, the gray one. That one right there. Been different colors over the years. I used to know every kid in the street, everybody who lived on it. A few years ago, to prove that I didn't grow up in the neighborhood, they had some guy show up and tell me how everybody was and who everyone in the neighborhood was, and he didn't remember who any of my family was. Imagine that. Boy, that was brilliant. There's not much to say. It's a suburban neighborhood. We lived in the first house. We'll go to the cemetery now. We're in the Mount Wollaston Cemetery right now, looking at the Elks Monument. Notice this is Greenleaf, and if you look down there, past the gate, you'll see Greenleaf continues. This is the only street I know of that comes through, it comes across the street and into a cemetery and has the same name. I call the other side Living Greenleaf, and I call this side, hang on a second, and call this side Dead Greenleaf. We're going to go over to the big puzzle marker in here. There's a lot of local historical stuff in here in the last 100 and so years. But we're going to skip most of that. I'm just going to go over to the Theophilus King Monument and then go over to the gravesite of the guy we were just talking about on Greenleaf Street with the people who pretended to live in that building. A few moments ago we were over there. Came in the gate, that's Greenleaf Street there. You see, we're in another New England cemetery. This one's a little more modern. That Southern Artery down there goes down. It's an empty apartment building down there. Actually, it's an empty old folks home that people pretend to live in. A lot of markers around here. I'm going to skip most of this. Some really funny stuff. But here was an old puzzle. Excuse me a second. You can see it's a marble made out of granite, which is a Masonic epoxy product, granite marble. And the guy who was buried here and his wife were the kings. There was Theophilus, who was the founder of the granite bank that we're just looking at. It is an old granite city, a bunch of granite quarries around. I'm not going to even go in there. Hang on a second. You can see there's Theophilus King and Helen Louise Baxter King, who were arrived and were promoted. You look at the inscription. What's interesting about this to me, it was a real puzzle for a lot of years, is what we hit on eventually, and I'm not going to go through the genesis of it, but with our work in forensic psychosocial historiography and linguistics, we were able to figure out that what they were talking about with this marker is what we call the dipolar promotion system. You take the high road and I'll take the low road. And he's on the high road and she's on the low road, even one under the other. That's it for. Here's another view of the cemetery. We're right now next to the Churchill Edwards marker, looking at the police station, which is down there. Bill Edwards was the city historian. He wrote a history of the city back in the 1950s. They have it at the local library. I read it there. Here's his marker. We just went by his house on Greenleaf Street, and there are a couple people there who, you know, did the placeholder skit of being there. Anyway, there's Bill Edwards. He lived behind me when I was a kid. He was on Greenleaf between Putnam and Edgemere, and I just talked to some people outside there. Probably they were there to pretend that I don't live in the town, cross it out. Never lived in the town, never grew up here, so it's what they usually do. As you can see, that's the cemetery. We're about to leave it. I'm going to hit the estuary next. Amazing what you run into in the cemetery. I thought this one was particularly interesting to take a picture of, given who this is going to. Alright, I lied again. Cemetery games. Uh-oh. Well, I got a new roommate one day, and turned out he got his name off the tombstone. I came through the cemetery the next day and went, oh man, not again. Or how about the Jamie Lee Curtis clone who bumped into me by no doubt coincidence right here on Halloween one year. We're on Furnace Brook Parkway right now. You can see a bunch of federal colonial houses. Right next to this used to be called Furnace Brook. Now they have Furnace Brook End back there somewhere. Parkway continues. This is the estuary. It's now called Blacks Creek or Marymount Marsh or something. We're going to be headed over there. It used to be called Treasure Island. They changed it to Caddy Park. I'm going to walk along the trail that goes next to the marsh. It's on the other side of the hill. You can easily see it. It's high tide now. I used to take my canoe up here sometimes. It was really nice when the estuary was a little bit icy. And let me show you. It's like that here, and it's a trail that goes off into the woods. We'll take a picture from in there somewhere. Here's a picture from about 100 yards in. The trail just goes right along the edge. It's a cliff right here. You can see there's some land. At low tide, further up, it's rocks and sand. And there's a bigger cliff that goes down. The birds hang out down there. Whenever you walk by, they scatter. Right now we're looking at the end of the estuary. It ends at Quincy Shore Drive. This is called Blacks Creek now on the map. It used to be the Furnace Brook. That's Treasure Island right there. We're going to be going over there. We're not going to be going over to the Sailors' Home Cemetery. There used to be a home for sailors back in the 19th century, mid-19th century, that was on that land. They, farmed their own acreage and whatnot, and took care of themselves in retirement. The first time I went there, I was looking at tombstones that Had a bunch of sailors who were sailors in the 1840s and 1850s. A couple of them went over Perry to Japan. The next time I went back, it was all Civil War stuff. So I don't know, you know, what people do with cemeteries, I got stories. I've studied them intensely. And then if you look over here, that's Fenno Street right there. And there's a little outcropping to the estuary. If you look at those brick houses, that's on a place called Langley Circle. Every time I go by, I get out. Koch Park. I call it Dick I. Koch Park. You can look it up on the map. As you can see, the trail continues. It goes right next to the estuary. That's Quincy Shore Drive there. You can see the bridge just peeping through. This entire area gets filled up and then drains right through that little bridge. I went through it on my boat once. That was it. The rest of the time I just carried it across. I swamped my boat. And there's Treasure Island. We're going to be headed over there. Here we are at the corner of Furnace Brook Parkway, which is where we just came from, and Quincy Shore Drive, which goes up. That right there is Shore Avenue. I used to live there in that gray house when it was white and it was older. Completely redone. I'll show you that from the beach. You can see the beginning of the beach here. The beach starts there. You can see the island. You get a better view from the other side. That's why we'll take a look at it. And then right over there is the bridge and then Treasure Island. I'm standing on the bridge right now. This is the estuary from the bridge side. You see it all fills up at high tide. It's high tide now. That's Treasure Island right there. I'm standing on the bridge. So let me show you the spillway. Actually goes pretty fast through there. And there's a big drop-off. I hit the drop-off and swamped my canoe. It's really pathetic. Those are what I call polemic Chinese. They don't belong here at all. They're totally non-interactive. They're here to pretend that that empty apartment building is filled with people when they actually live here when they couldn't possibly. One was the nose puller, I think. And they're gonna, there you go. There's that bridge over there that sometimes fills up in there when it gets super high tides. That's Treasure Island. We got the parking lot and then the beach on the other side. We're on Treasure Island now. It's a place to walk dogs, bring the kids, and it's sometimes on the flyway for some birds in the spring and especially in the fall. There's that Sailor's Home Cemetery over the estuary behind. You can see why I used to come out here a lot. I used to live right over there. And this is a nice place to hang out and not have anybody bother me much at all. Scenery's nice. I just saw an egret fly by. Sometimes there are herons out here. There are hawks that used to work the marsh. Crows are out here, seagulls. Cormorants are not here at high tide. They're here when the tide's a bit lower. You can take a canoe all the way through there. I did once, but it was really pointless. I used to be out in the ocean all the time, really. This is the marker for the park. And it's kind of hard to know what to say. At least they understand that having a Medal of Honor is a good thing. I walk around with my cap on. Can't even get anybody to say, hey, do you actually have one of those? Where'd you steal that one from? Or whatever. They don't say anything. I like that polemic Chinese stuff that passed by. Alright, we're leaving the Treasure Island area now. There's the estuary. I'm taking some pictures out here. Nice fall colors. I had it a couple times. Bird pictures. I had got a really nice picture of a warbler down a branch down there. Had some decent hawk pictures around here too. We're now on Wollaston Beach. We're looking up what was my boat route. Often I used to paddle up to the two boathouses that are further up the beach around the corner there. It's a very pretty place. There's some islands out here. You can see Moon Island straight ahead. There used to be a bridge between that and Long Island, but they took the bridge down a couple years ago. Probably to prove that the city was occupied or something. That's Long Island there. There's a couple of facilities out there, but you can't get there anymore by car or bus because the bridge is gone. You get a couple more islands, closer ones, or a closer one. Let's see, there's what they call Hangman's Island. I used to go out there and take a couple of pictures. Go out there, a bunch of birds. There's a place where they used to hang 150 years ago. Legends about pirates, I don't believe. If you look further out, you can see the Brewster Islands. And right there, see the flash? That was Boston Lighthouse. The resolution on this camera's not so great. Then we have Pettix Island. I've been out there too. And, then we have Nut Island, which is a sewage treatment facility. As a direct pipeline goes under the harbor, goes all the way across the bay. I'll show you there. Okay, so Long Island, you can see that's Point Shirley on Deer Island. That was the other side of Deer Island. See that Boston Harbor side. This Deer Island. Okay, let me see. That over there is House Neck. Then you got whole long shoreline. I used to ride along that quite a bit too. I go swimming out here starting somewhere around the end of April. We have Post Island just to the left there. Then we have Marymount that starts here with the cliffs and the hill. And there's the Marymount School. That's where I went to elementary school. That's where we're going to end up today before I go to lunch. And then here's the place I came back and lived for a while. That's the neighborhood right there. It's between Virginia and Victoria. And it's it was 39 Shore Avenue. It's the gray house now. It used to be white. And I used to call it God's Dumbest Acre. Those are the houses on it right there. I'm standing now on Black's Creek on the bridge. And you can see the water flowing out of the estuary into the lower tide. And it'll go until half tide comes in the other direction. That's again, that's Nut Island and House Neck. And you got Marymount right here. Old elementary school, all redone. Good people go there. And there's God's Dumbest Acre. Pretty sad. This little piece of land here I call Seagull's Bite. Low tide, it sticks out like that. It used to be a different direction at Black's Creek. They moved the bridge years and years ago. Ducks over there, you can see them, but not many seagulls, and all that tells me is nobody's home. There's more proof of it. It's kind of silly to speak. More than dozens out there. There's the private beach. Linden trees, I used to sit under them. Some knuckleheads are around trying to pretend to live in the area. I guess somebody took over for Flaherty, because Flaherty died. You can see the same islands. Canteen over there. I'm going to go up to the public landing part because I don't want to offend the wordless trolls or, you know, try to show me that they understand the meaning of private property. I'm now standing on the East Jetty, looking back at C Street, that gray house, you know, that's the one I lived in. That room on the 3rd floor, That was mine. It's all redone. It was an older looking house built in, I think it was 1911. There's Quincy Shore Drive. There's Black's Creek. There's the bridge. There's Treasure Island over there. Jetty. There's the bend. You can see the city of Boston there in the distance. This doesn't have a good telephoto. That's the best I'm going to do. In front of that is something called Squantum. I used to take the boat out there too. I took the boat out to Squantum, got out to Moon Island, which is that one right there. I take it beyond the old bridge. There's Spectacle Island, Thompson's Island. I go out over there. Long Island. I go out over there. Go out and around. I went to Hangman's a lot. As I said, I went to Pedex. Just to be on the ferry run. I don't know if they do ferries anymore. I've seen them down there. Been out in this water probably about 200 times, give or take. I'm going to end things here. What we're looking at here is the Marymount Elementary School. I went here from 1965 to 68. Was my my elementary school, kindergarten till the beginning of 4th grade. Then my family moved out to Needham. I always think of this as home. Not sure what. That's what they took from me, my home. I'm gonna go up and have lunch now and see what they want to pretend up there. Just had somebody go by with 317, which was the length of the film I sent this morning. I'm sure that was another amazing, worthless, coward coincidence. Went past a 303 marker. If you follow that kind of stuff, then you know. They're robots that need that kind of stuff to make threats. Robo-threats. And gassers. All the same. Here we are on C Street and almost the Southern Artery. This is the gate to the cemetery from the other side. I'll show you. Down C Street there. There are probably 10 stories I could talk about right off the top of my head, all of which are quite fascinating. Some of them really insightful for our secular social historiography work. Something that happened just right here around the intersection, the police station in the back of it. Looking at the buildings, and it all triggers something. Good all day, I can stand here. I don't even know what it is. Now you can see Quincy Square, there's a granite bank, and there's that empty intercontinental condo complex, which shows to me that quite some interesting implications. That's all I'll say for now.